Hi, and welcome to the Feeding Hour. In this episode, Katherine, a pediatric physical therapist and mom of 3 boys, joins us to tell us about her feeding journey. We emphasize the importance of timing and readiness when making decisions about interventions for your child, as well as normalizing asking for support. We are so happy to have Katherine on and cannot wait to share her story with you all. Enjoy. Hey, Abby.
Hi, Catherine. How are ya?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, good.
Well, I'm so happy that we have a guest today. You want to go ahead and introduce her?
Yes, so this is Katherine Benkeser. She is a pediatric PT in Atlanta, and we're so excited to hear her stories today, and maybe get into the professional side too. Did I say your name right? Katherine Benkeser?
Yes, Benkeser. Mm-hmm.
Benkeser. Great. Okay.
Awesome.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
welcome, Katherine. We're so happy to have you. I'd love for you to just start off by talking about your own journey with feeding. I know you have boys, so yeah, we could start off there and then go from there.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me. Like you guys said, I'm an infant pediatric PT here in Atlanta. I've been doing that for 10 and a half years now. And it's really funny to see kind of like where I started with professionally. And then after having 3 boys of my own and our unique feeding journeys each time, where I've ended up and how that shaped my career now.
Mhm.
Little bit of a flip, but honestly, the way that kids develop, it makes sense that feeding is one of those early gross motor milestones and how that can shape their trajectory. Um, so yeah, all the things. Um,
Yeah. So
Feeding was super different for each of my boys. So they are 7, 5, and newly 3 now.
Wow, you're busy.
Yes,
yeah,
Oh
we're
my
all over
God.
the place all the time, but it's good.
Oh,
yeah. So
so fun.
starting off, what did you know about feeding going in since you weren't in the pediatric PT
Mhm.
world?
So yeah, I actually really didn't know, despite knowing a lot about childhood development, I didn't know anything about breastfeeding or infant feeding. I mean, I've been babysitting since my younger brother was born. Mom has pictures of me like literally bottle feeding him when I'm 3 and I'm like propped on the couch with a pillow. So I've been
Love it.
feeding babies for a while, but not that I actually had any background in it. Um,
Mhm.
I honestly didn't know anything about breastfeeding. My siblings and I were bottle fed, so that was new for me.
Mhm.
Um, and looking back now, I really wish that I would have sought like a prenatal consultation with lactation so that I had been a little bit more prepped because I think a lot of moms, myself for sure, go into it thinking like, oh, like it's a natural concept. And this relates honestly to both breastfeeding and bottle feeding.
Mhm.
That it's normal, it's natural, it'll just come. And I don't really think that it's talked a lot about like how tricky that can actually be and that there's just so many more resources and support out there. So I will just say like that's one thing
Love
I
that.
know I wish I
Yeah.
knew back then.
Well, and
Yes.
that's something that we've talked about in other episodes that, like, right, we think it's natural. It's just like, oh, you just put the baby to your breast, But what is it,
Figure it
Abby,
out.
like 70% of,
Yes, like so many people you mean the people that don't end up meeting their goals?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like it's like only I think 80% want to breastfeed and only like 30% kind of make it to their goals. So
Yeah.
that's a huge gap.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too like putting the lens on like everyone's successful feeding journey, like what success
Different.
looks like to one parent can be drastically different from another parent. And so I feel like finding resources and providers that fit like what your personal goals look like is huge.
So
Yeah.
huge. Yeah. And you might not know what your goals are like when you're pregnant, right? Because you don't really you just know, oh, yeah, I definitely want feeding to go well, and I might want to try breastfeeding and might want to do a combination of both. I think a lot of people are kind of not sure. So I
Yeah.
think, like you said, it helps to just meet with someone, talk it through, and then have that resource throughout the journey.
Yeah, that kind
Yeah.
of plays into
Your
my
first
feeding
baby.
journey with my oldest.
Oh, awesome.
So he was born full term, but after a very long back labor of 36 hours. He was sunny side up, and we actually needed a little bit of vacuum assist to help get him out at that point, which like luckily that did well. Like he didn't need any intervention there, and he actually latched right from the start, but it was excruciatingly painful for me. Like it got to the point where after the first few days, where my endorphins were kind of fading a little bit, that like he would cry and I would kind of be like, oh, like I really want to feed you, but like I know it's gonna hurt. Fortunately, I did already have a pump at home. And so I met with lactation right away in the hospital, and they didn't really mention anything about like tethered oral tissue or, you know, that pain response. Plus, I think I was still on some pain medication for relief from everything after birth. But then when I got home, met with someone who actually did a home visit, which I very much appreciated not going anywhere in the early days. And she was like, yeah, you know, let's let you do like some direct feeding, some use of the pump and giving bottles. My mom was really excited about that because she really wanted to feed baby and was not wanting to wait. So that was great for bonding for like other caregivers in the house too.
That's awesome.
But that recommendation came because I was having so much pain and damage that they were like, let's figure out a way to get your body some break and recovery while we're also still building supply and taking care of baby at the same time.
And just to jump in, this is what you might hear of as triple feeding. And that is like, it can be it's really hard and time consuming, but it can be, like you said, a really good way to maintain your supply while you're working out the kinks.
Yeah, and I think, you know, for me, like I knew that the goal of that was that it was going to be short term or like a bridge until we had gotten more support with feeding, which I think is huge. It wasn't just like, okay, we're going to do that forever.
Right.
Yeah. And I love the piece about bottle feeding helped incorporate your mom into bonding with him,
Yeah,
like
dad
other
too. He loved
caregivers.
it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'd love to know like what we talked about success, like going into your first child, did you have kind of an ideal of success of what that was, or were you just kind of more open?
I would say I was a mixture of both. I had a goal of giving breast milk for a year. But wasn't really specifically attached, or I didn't know that I had a specific plan for what that looked like, whether that was like, you know, exclusive breastfeeding versus like combo feeding, sometimes with a bottle. Sometimes I knew daycare was in our future. And so I knew that we needed bottles. And so I wanted to make sure that we had that early practice of bottles anyway. It just so also worked out that my body responded well to the pump that I had already gotten. And then also, I was given the advice that like it was okay to start bottles at that point.
Awesome.
Okay, yeah, please continue.
Yeah, what else happened with that journey?
Yeah, so when the lactation consultant came to the house, she was like, I suspect tethered oral tissues are at play. At that point, I was given the advice honestly because he was quite anterior, which I think was contributing to that significant pain for me. And he was pretty tight and tense from long labor and all the things. But she was like, just go get a release as like whoever will take you first, basically. That's not what I probably would tell myself now, knowing that the space that I'm in, but I am really thankful that that was what protected our feeding journey and breastfeeding for us. Because I think if it had stayed that painful, I probably would have been like an exclusive pumper. So I am thankful for that part because it made so even though I know that the anterior portion of his tongue tie was addressed, he still had a posterior component remaining. But it was significantly less painful where I wasn't like flinching knowing that we were going to have to latch afterwards. So that was awesome.
Yeah.
I'm the same way, whereas like now I'm like, ugh, I wish I knew more about like the holistic care when I did it with my son, but I'm like, it probably did save our journey. So I'm glad we got the intervention we needed. And
Yeah.
you do what you can with what you know at the time.
Totally. And it's evolving
Right.
and research is always changing and you're in those early hormonal days not sleeping. So, you know, honestly, like I'm thankful for what it did because I was able to do a combination of bottles, pumping, and breastfeeding with him until 14 months. So
Amazing.
yeah, so
Yeah,
we did
that
it.
is amazing. That's
I mean, just that
awesome.
you got off the triple feeding and made your goal and like got him to latch without hurting and all of that. Yeah. Any other things like with starting solids or anything you want to share about his journey, and then you can get into your second son.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. He is still my really big, tall kiddo. So postural control is not still like our, easiest side. So we've done a lot of PT support for him through me and also colleagues, because sometimes you can't be mom and therapist. So sometimes you have to delegate. So that was a learning curve for me as well with him. But very thankful to have a lot of resources in Atlanta. So we started solids. He wasn't sitting with good control until really like more towards 7.5, 8 months. So I wish I had done a little bit more like direct PT with him for that, so that we could have been a little bit more proactive with starting solids. He was doing like teethers with us, like while we were eating and stuff like that. So actually his transitions to solids were fine. But I really wanted to do baby-led weaning. And so I wanted to make sure that he had all this postural control just from a safety standpoint prior to him like really ingesting for calories.
That makes sense. Yes.
Yeah,
I would love
interesting
to
too.
even get into more of that too. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I know.
basically we love, yeah, we could do a whole podcast on this, on like helping people know how to start solids. But
Oh yeah,
Yeah, and the
for sure.
postural aspect.
yes,
You have such a unique perspective as a PT. That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's definitely been fun. I will say that was unique to him, and also because again, I'm not a feeding therapist, right? And so like starting solids with him was interesting from that standpoint. Like I literally went on YouTube and watched babies safely, appropriately gagging when they were starting
yes,
solids for like 10 straight minutes, because he
that's
gagged a
good
little bit once,
advice.
got a piece out, and I was like, I don't like the sound of that. And my husband's like, I think he's fine. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but I don't like it. So I like almost desensitized myself
Exposure
of what's
therapy.
normal. And then I was like, okay, cool. I feel good about this now. And then it like didn't bother me anymore.
But that's a good point. Like I actually do that with patients. Sometimes I'll like show them videos of babies eating and I'll be like, hey,
Yeah.
just so you know, this is what it looks like. It's not going to be like they start ingesting all the food. They're going to be just like munching on it and then spitting it out and gagging,
Mm-hmm.
coughing, all the things. And of course, there's like, we need to be safe about it, but
Yes.
it doesn't always sound very pleasant because they're learning and they're trying to figure it
Yeah.
out.
Right. And that gag is there for safety, and it's
Protection.
anterior in the mouth, like prior to moving back for safety reasons. But I had just never really like watched a baby feed like that. And so I was like, I'm gonna like ask my friends and also watch videos and make sure that
Yes.
that's fine.
Cool.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
Like seeking out resources and being like, what is normal?
normal.
Like just so like am I doing this right? You know what I mean? Like my baby's never done this before and I've never done this before with your first child. So it's like
Such a learning curve with for sure.
I
yeah.
know they really,
So how did
they
that
really go through
change
it.
going into your second? Like, how did you feel about feeding? Were you like, oh, I'm gonna do things differently? Or were you like, I mean, I was like so sure my second would have a tongue tie after you go through that experience, you're like preparing for the challenges, maybe.
Yeah, well, yeah, so it's funny. They've been completely three
So different.
unique experiences, which I don't know why I wouldn't expect that, because I think that babies just pop out with their own personality right from the start. So meeting each individual person, it's a totally new dyad each time. So I don't know why I expected different. But yeah, my second guy, so he was almost 2 weeks post dates. He was very content where he was not showing any signs of coming out on his own. So we tried, we went in for an induction to help speed things along, and he just like never really kind of dropped. Turns out, the nurses were very sweet after my C-section. They were like, well, honey, he has a 99th plus percentile head. And I was
Oh my
like,
God.
you're just trying to be kind and tell me that it is not on the chart. That's okay.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So
So
he was
there was
very
like,
snuggled.
yeah, he was ready for his C-section.
Yeah, he was like, I'm good. Just leave me here. I'm happy where I am. Do not move me. Um,
God.
So yeah, so he ended up kind of showing me the airway side and torticollis side and plagiocephaly side of infancy and early feeding. He had a little bit of reflux, which, knowing now what I know, he had aerophagia, was taking in too much air, and so that was hard for him. He also had a lot of tension, and also because of the asymmetry, that we couldn't midline feed very well, so that was affecting things too.
Mm-hmm.
So when he latched, it was so much more comfortable than when my oldest had latched that I like didn't even go down the same tethered oral tissue tongue tie space with him because I was like, oh, this is better. It must not be a thing. It was just until later that he was having kind of the airway piece as far as like struggle with longer duration deep sleep on his back. As a toddler, he had night terrors and he would like soak through diapers. So having a lot of rhesus in the night and that little reflex piece for him, things like that.
More subtle signs, but then they get more obvious over time.
Yes. Yeah, they were there. I think just barely see it, and it was so different than my first. I just was like, oh, if it's not A, then it has to be, something totally different.
Right. When you say
Um,
feeding was better, sorry to
mhm,
interrupt, but
yeah.
like it was less painful altogether.
Yeah, I would say I had little to no latch pain with him. Um, yeah, so it was just comfortable. He was able to like stay on, not latch, unlatch. I didn't start pumping with him as early because it was not uncomfortable. And so I wasn't doing that triple feeding with him, which was nice from a time perspective. We did start bottles. I had a little bit of an oversupply with with all of my kids. So I was able to kind of collect extra milk off of my letdown side just so that I wasn't soaking my shirts constantly. And so I had milk in bottles. So he also did get bottles right from the start. So my husband would do some of the night wakings and then I would pump if I needed to maintain supply. But otherwise, if I was okay, we were helping regulate that for me.
Nice. So did you ever end up, how did you handle like the later signs when he was older, like the sleep and airway stuff?
Yeah, so he was my COVID baby. Also, COVID happened 3 months after he was born. So not two, I think we were just like in our family bubble
Yeah.
there. But looking at it now, so he's 5, and at 4, we started palate expansion because he actually had that high bubble palate, which, is not surprising. I have it too, which might have contributed to that aerophagia as well. But he's gone through a tonsil and adenoid removal. He's had palate expansion. He still hasn't had a frenuloplasty or any tongue tie releases at this point. That is in our future. But he's just not ready yet from an emotional standpoint and from a myofunctional therapy standpoint.
Nice.
So,
I just love hearing that side of things because it's like I think about that with my kids too. I'm like, you can still know things and but it has to be the right time of intervention for each thing for your family and for the kid and everything going on. So I like just hearing how people approach it at different stages.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think like some of the times I've had frustrations because I'm like, okay, I know what I want him to have, or I know like what I want that to look like for him. But also like because I'm the adult like making the decisions, I also have to like take a step back and remember like, okay, if he's not ready to handle something like that, then we're just gonna wait. Because
Yeah.
I would rather like wait and make sure he's ready than like try and rush something.
Or something.
Mhm.
Oh, I mean,
Yeah.
and you have to kind of you're raising a whole child. Like when you're a therapist, you can make certain recommendations. That's why it's different being like the mom because you're like, okay, I'm thinking about like everything, like how they're adjusting to school or like different
Yeah.
things we have coming up and like yeah, like I had the same thing like my son's tonsils or not tonsils, adenoids and ear tubes were done
Mhm.
recently
Yep.
and I had thought about doing like another tongue tie release during it because I still think it's too tight. And I'm like, you know what? That is too much to just like add that in right now. And he needs to do more mile, get older. Like there's so many like layers to these things. So
I think I think oftentimes too, I know I have felt this personally, and I feel like it's probably not uncommon for parents and moms with young infants and toddlers, is that every decision feels so monumental and so important right that second that I think it's really hard to like take that step back when you're in the moment and be like, okay, like, are they safe? Are they loved? Are we growing? Like, do we have our base needs met? Okay. If those things are okay, we can take a minute and breathe and then try and hit those additional layers. And it's so hard in those early days to tell
Wow.
yourself that or to do that. So hopefully you have supports in place, whether it's friends, a therapist, family
yeah,
members to it will be okay.
yeah,
They
Mhm.
will all eventually get there. It'll all figure itself out in due time. And that's taken me a lot of work and a lot of time to kind of
get
come
there.
around to.
Wow. Yeah, that's like so cool to hear too, just from a therapy perspective of like you're speaking to a mother who's able to make her own decisions and actually can make the best decisions for this child. So again, like Abby said, we can make recommendations, but really mother and whoever knows best. So yeah.
Yeah, they're the expert in their own child.
No child. Oh my gosh.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I always tell new parents that like really empower them with that. I'm like, you're going to get a lot of information from a lot of different voices, but you need to know that like you're in charge of what you end up doing. Like, yeah.
Yeah,
Anyways,
no one
okay.
else is waking up with that baby in the middle of the night but you and other caregivers. And so like you have to feel good about like what you're doing at the end of the day.
Yes.
So true.
So what about your third? Tell us about your last baby or third baby.
Yes. No, last baby.
Last.
We have a house full, so I like my crazy chaos with my three. Yeah, so my youngest was I was attempting and kind of like did a lot of different things like Webster chiropractic and pelvic floor PT, which I highly recommend on the front end. I should have known as a PT to like do that prenatally and things like that too. But even that, again, it's the same thing. It's like, oh, women have been birthing for however many odd years. It's a natural process. And it totally is. But like, I wasn't in touch with like my breathing patterns and just like all of that knowledge and pelvic floor tension, all the things that like you really, a little bit of support can go like such a long way. Um, which is surprising because I'm a PT. So, but you don't know until you know.
So true.
But anyway, yeah. So I ended up having a C-section with my third as well. But all the things I think helped us like have such a gentler, smoother transition into that. So I'm still thankful for all of that work on the front end. I think it was well worth it. Um, and he is such a calm, chill little dude. And so he's my only baby that I got a partial golden hour with, which was really nice. We had interrupted time with both my first and my second. And so like that I really cherished because I had already been integrating kind of lactation informed space and changing and crafting my practice by the time that I was pregnant with him and then having him. And so knowing more, I was like, I really want that. I didn't have that with my other two. So that was really great. And feeding him and latching him, I was like, oh, this is what it could feel like. And so I'm like, oh yeah, my middle guy, like definitely like that was better, but that was still not a super comfy latch. It just wasn't like over pain because I had acclimatized myself to being like, this is what pain is. So this didn't feel like pain. And I was like, oh, we had some room for improvement.
And pain is so subjective. That's what I'm always trying to talk to
Yep.
moms about like, so what does it feel like? And like trying to figure out like if it's just the normal getting used to it. But really any pain we say is like there's something to be improved with the latch.
Yeah, we really shouldn't be in
Yeah,
pain.
no.
Um, yeah. So,
Oh,
and we could
yes.
have a whole conversation about that too. But
Yeah, that's well, it's interesting too. Yeah, like what you think is normal as a first mom. So if you're like, if your mom went through pain every single baby, then you're like, oh, pain's normal, but it actually doesn't have to. And when you think about all the factors happening, you know, postpartum, it's like you don't, if you can feel less pain when the baby latches, then let's go for it, you know? Why
Yeah.
not? So, yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Oh
so
my gosh.
please continue. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so with him, the early days were going well, which was great. His hiccup was respiratory stuff. So big brother's coming home from daycare, loving on him. And so he actually was hospitalized with bronchiolitis 3 separate times in our newborn phase at 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and 10 weeks.
Oh, that's
And so that first go round, obviously being the smallest, was, needing more support. So we had 3 nights in the PICU at CHOA on oxygen and NG tube with him because infants are obligate nasal breathers. And so when you're nursing or if you're bottle feeding, either way, when you're feeding, you're using your mouth. And if you're blocking your mouth as an airway option, and you have too much congestion because you have tiny little nares and a smaller airway in general because of your anatomy structure, which is the case in our family, then we needed some oxygen and we needed to be able to bypass that. So he had some positive pressure and oxygen via nasal cannula to help with that.
how was that as a mom, like being the mom in the hospital space? I've experienced that and I'm like, oh, it's so different being on that side of things. Yeah.
I've never worked in the NICU. Specifically, I've done shadowing and things like that there, but I haven't, that has never been a part of my career from that standpoint. So I would say like a lot of that experience was totally new for me. Neither of my other boys got sick that young. So I definitely was able, I think, from a PT lens to know when to take him in. It had gotten to the point where I was like, my husband was like, I don't like how fast he's breathing. I was starting to see like early retractions, and I was like, okay, do I take him to the pediatrician or do I go like straight in? And my husband's like, honestly, I default to you in this particular area because this is your specialty. And I was like, great, we're going to go straight to the ER. Like, I'm not okay with his presentation right now. So
Good for you. That's a hard call.
I debated for a hot minute and I was like, I just am not comfortable. Like at the end of the day, I was like, I'm not comfortable anymore.
It's better. Yeah.
Trusting your instinct.
So we're very fortunate to have children's here in Atlanta and they were fantastic. Not all of it was smooth because tensions are high and, I was newly postpartum healing from a C-section at 2 weeks. So that was tricky. So all the tensions, all the hormones, all the, I don't know, breathing stuff is scary for me, as it would be for any parent, I imagine. But all went well. He was able to transition down from the PICU just down to the regular floor and then go home. So it was very short term bridging him that 3 to 5 days for that viral course to run. And so I pumped and we fed him through the NG tube. And then when we got discharged, we were discharged. Then we were back 2 weeks later when he had a new virus.
Oh my gosh. Was he able to latch during this in between like the hospital stays?
Dude
Or
was a champ. Oh my gosh. You guys, he could not breathe at all. Like,
because breastfeeding can be hard when you can't breathe because you're really
breathe at all. Like
You
even
have
in
to
general,
breathe
like right now I have a cold, a stuffy nose. I'm like, I'm just gonna go without because like I can't. He would like latch, try and like get a couple sucks, totally hold his breath the entire time to like get through it, and then like unlatch and pant. Like I was like,
oh,
okay,
that's
do you
so
guys
sad.
want me to like not nurse him? But it was also the only thing that comforted him
Yes.
in that point. So like while we were in triage and stuff like that, I was unlatching him because I was like, you need to breathe. And so I was pacing him at the
Yeah.
breast,
Oh my gosh.
almost as if you would like pace bottle feed.
Amazing.
So that was it. It's like ha ha funny now, but like in the moment I was like,
Scary.
oh my gosh, like no, like take a minute
Yeah.
kind of a scenario. So that was interesting. That took a little bit of processing afterwards. I think in the moment of any big situation, like you're just in it. And then later on, you're like, oh,
That's crazy.
that was crazy. That impacted me a little bit. Like I have some unpacking to do here.
Oh yeah.
I definitely
Same.
had
Yeah.
like the I know like a lot of my nurse friends will talk about alarm fatigue from,
Oh,
or like NICU moms think, same thing. It's like you just like hear the O2 sat monitors going up and stuff like that. So I was like, yeah, definitely like a few days like in the shower, like afterwards, I'm like, I'm hearing things.
Yeah. Well, it's just amazing. Like, thanks for talking about this. Thank you for unpacking this with us in a way, like,
Yeah.
because it's these stories need to be told. And
yeah.
yeah, I just want to take a
Yeah,
moment
and
and
it
thank
is.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree because it is like hard to even revisit that. Like whenever, I don't know, still when I talk about both my NICU stays, I'm like, even though, you process it and you get away from it and you're like, okay, you accept what happened, it's still always like scary and just stressful, like having your child in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you guys are doing with the podcast is really important, is normalizing early feeding difficulties
Acknowledge it.
or struggles. Because what that struggle or difficulty or challenge looks like for everyone's totally different, but that doesn't mean that everyone doesn't have them.
And everyone has something. Like even
Yep.
I feel like in this space, I mean, you working in this space too, like I rarely, even with friends or anything, I rarely hear of someone where they didn't have some challenge, even if it's like bottle refusal down the road or starting
Yep.
solids, like some, it will come at some point. So
Mhm.
like, I just feel like it's helpful to hear about it. So then you're like, okay, like there is support for this out here, or just it's normal to go through these things.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
normalizing asking for support. Like, I mean, getting support doesn't mean that you failed. It doesn't mean you've done something wrong. It just means that there's information out there in the world that you don't have at that moment, but you can get.
Uh, so how has feeding been like with your third since then?
Since then, honestly, I would say he was probably my easiest. We breastfed until 15 months. I I got lucky. My guys kind of self-weaned when they were ready. My middle guy weaned himself like at 12 months. I laugh that he's like my biggest eater because he was kind of just like, hey, solids are great. Like, you know, breastfeeding has been lovely, but I'm out. He was like, I'll
Yeah.
take my cup and I'll take my solids and I'm good. So he kind of
Yeah.
just like, one day we nursed to bed and then like the next morning he was like, no, I don't want it. Like, I want to go to the table.
Oh, were you ever like sad about it, or you were ready at those points when? Because I know self-weaning can be like, some people love it. They're like, oh, I was so ready. It was the line.
Mhm.
People are like, wait, I didn't know that was my last time.
Yeah, it took me, so with my oldest, it was 14 months, and I was kind of like, oh, okay. Like I was fine with it. With my middle guy, I think it took me by surprise because I had like 14 months in my head from my previous experience. So it was like, oh, we're probably not there yet. But yeah, he was just like, I'm good. It's like, okay. So
Cool.
I actually was fine with it for the first two. When my third was done and I knew he was my last baby, and I think just because of the beginning initial stuff with him too, um, and nursing had always been like his like comfort, like that was his regulation and everything like that in the hospital and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
I think I had a harder time being done with him, but he too, like around that time was kind of like, yeah, like take it or leave it, mom, I'm good. And I was like, okay, I guess we're just done.
We're done. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, good for you. That's amazing. I feel like,
Yeah.
yeah, weaning could be. We should ask more about people's weaning journeys too on
I
this.
agree.
Yeah, you
Because it's
should.
honestly such a good, it's like the first time the detachment that, well, I don't know, I don't have kids, but the detachment that needs to happen throughout motherhood, like going to school, leaving for, like, it's just the first of many times. So yeah, it can be something.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I think it's the time like where we're actively like feeding them, like sitting and feeding them or nursing with them. That like I think a lot of that feeding is paired in with like snuggles and things too. And then when they can feed themselves, they're not snuggling with us while they're eating, right? They're sitting next to us and eating and, maybe chatting.
yeah, yeah, right. It's like a little bit of a mini morning, of that time. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we ask every guest this. And so you talked about kind of the ability to make decisions as a mother, right? You being the one who's going to wake up with that baby. No one else is going to be there. if you could give any advice or guidance to a mom who, say, she's postpartum, just had the baby, and experiencing feeding challenges, what would you give?
Yeah, I mean, in that case where baby is already present in the world, I would say like find your community, find your resources.
Mhm.
Um, I think family support is huge in so many ways, but I also think sometimes like hearing it from multiple sources, like I know sometimes in the early days, like hearing something once for me, like might have not stuck, but then like if I got told it either a second iteration, second exposure, it kind of hit a little different or stuck. Whether that was like two different friends or it was like my husband making an observation and then also a lactation consultant saying the same thing. Um, but just like, I don't know, not being in isolation as much as you can, like finding ways to get out or having phone calls or just, I don't know. We weren't meant to do it alone. So figuring out like who your people are.
Oh my gosh, I love that you said that. And that's one of the things that I love about your milestone group that you do with new moms. Cause I'm like, I feel like, oh, that is just what new moms need is to see other people working out their kinks and like seeing what's happening with their milestones. And I don't know, just doing it as a village, as a community.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't have a lot of that with my first from like a social standpoint. I had and am still incredibly thankful for how much family support both through my husband and our extended family have. And we use and love them lots. But I didn't have a lot of like that friend group because we were the first ones to have a baby out of our friend group. And so I think had I known now that things like that are available, I think it would have been really enjoyable.
Yeah. Yeah. So just, if you wouldn't mind taking a second, tell us about the Milestones group and just anything else you'd like to share, where people can find more about you and your practice.
Your practice. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So my practice, I'm based in Midtown, but I do at the moment all home visits. I don't have an office space yet, and do proximity of Midtown. So families can find me on Instagram, Little B Therapy, or my website, which is littlebtherapy.com. Can reach out an email. There's a work text number there. So if you have questions, reach out. And then the milestone meetup, I run with an infant feeding therapist, Jacqueline Murphy. And we've really been having a lot of fun, both collaborating and doing that, and then being able to answer questions across like a wider variety for parents. We had one this morning, which was really fun, and we did rolling. We did different carrying positions to help developmentally at a couple different ages this morning, and then we did some painting and tummy time, which was fun. All the parents took home like baby's first artwork, which was really cute.
So cute. Wow. Well, thank you so much. I know Abby is too. Honored to hear your story and really appreciate you sharing, coming on and joining us today. Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thanks for having
So
me.
much. I love all your three different stories and like, yeah, just hearing all your wisdom as a therapist and a mom.
It's amazing.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks,
Alrighty.
y'all.
Bye.
Thank you guys so much for listening. If you are interested in learning more about attachment feeding or have any feedback for us at all, please email us at thefeedinghourpodcast@gmail.com. You can also sign up for our email list in the link in the show notes to be the first to know when a new episode is released.